Dual citizenship is a great way to give yourself an alternative so that you're not just beholden to one country. But with dual citizenship comes the ability to travel with two different passports. And yet, how do you know which passport to use when you're traveling? We've talked about this before, but I wanted to update it for 2023 because I was recently talking to a friend of mine who actually came to visit me. He lives in the United States. We were having a party in Istanbul, Turkey, and Americans, US citizens, need to have an e-visa to get into Turkey. It's really quite easy. You go to the website, you pay a few bucks, you get the e-visa, and you're on your way. But for some reason, the e-visa website was working rather intermittently before he was on his way, and it was getting close to his travel date. And we were both getting a little bit worried. He's not someone who travels that often, and I didn't want him to have any problems getting into Turkey. Now, I'd forgotten that Turkey actually has a visa office where you can still go on arrival and just pay the cash and get the visa there. It takes a little longer, but as long as that office is open, you shouldn't have a problem. But it's always better to have the e-visa. And yet, I realized at one moment, wait a second, we helped you get your European citizenship by descent. And that European country does not need an e-visa for Turkey. They could just show up the same way that you would show up in pretty much any other country with your American passport. And so I said, here's what you do. When you leave the United States, you are going to go to the airline check-in desk. And they're going to say, okay, show us proof that you can get into Turkey. Now, you can probably show your American passport because they may think, okay, there's that little visa office. Occasionally it may be closed, but okay, they're probably not going to worry about that. But what you probably want to do is show them your European passport, and they'll say, okay, it says in the system you don't need a visa, so we're not going to bother you. You can just show up. And then when you leave the U.S., there is no exit immigration, so there's really no one to show your passport to. But whenever you enter and whenever you leave the United States, you're supposed to do so as an American, because if you have a U.S. passport, you are an American when you're on their soil. You don't get to avail yourself of having other citizenships. So you leave the United States, to the extent that that's really a process, as an American with your US passport. Make sure to take it with you. And then when you arrive in Turkey, you show them your European passport. And so did that. He said, oh my goodness, it was a delight. It doesn't travel as much. And he said this was incredibly easy because he had never really traveled that much on this second passport to realize this is just as easy, if not easier, than going as an American. I think a lot of Americans have this idea that people love seeing a US passport, and like any other passport, they're like, are you sure? And the reality is if you're on the list, if you're on the visa-free list, there's generally not a difference. I've been to, let's say, the United Kingdom as both a US citizen and then thereafter as a St. Lucian citizen. And I actually think it was a little easier as a St. Lucian citizen, right? So sometimes being an American does not make things easier, and it may not be the easiest. So he's in Istanbul. A couple days later, party's over. He's flying home, and he's at the airline check-in desk, and he says, he's calling me like, what do I tell them? Like, they're asking for my American passport, but I came in on my European passport. And I said, when you check in with the airline, they want to see how are you going to get into your next destination. Now, there's some destinations that I think airlines are more lax on. It's like, they let everybody in. We don't care. They're visa policy is very flexible. And yes, Europeans can go to the United States, but a European would require to have an ESTA. They would have had to fill out a form online. And obviously someone who's also a US citizen can't get pre-clearance to go to the United States as a tourist because they're a citizen. On top of that, the European passport lists that he was born in the United States. And so much the same way that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was denied boarding on a flight to, I think it was Mexico, that flew through the US because they said, you need a US passport. Unless you can prove you're no longer a US citizen, you can't fly through the US as a foreigner because you have to enter the US and then reclaim your bags, get your, on to your next destination in Mexico. And so Boris Johnson had to change his entire flight and how it was routed to not go through the US because he had not given up his US citizenship that he got by being born in New York. And he had to basically, go through somewhere else because only U.S. citizens have to come in as U.S. citizens. So he's checking in for the flight, and the airline wants to know, how are you going to get into the United States? I mean, if you're a European, show us your ESTA. Why aren't you Americans? That's right here. Okay, show them the U.S. passport because that's how you're getting into your destination. And then you're going to go to the immigration counter, and you're going to show the same passport you used to come in on. Generally speaking, and there are exceptions, and if you're a second passport holder and your passport's stolen, there are some countries that will be somewhat flexible with you and say, okay, just send us a picture of the stamp or give us the passport number or whatever, and then we'll stamp any other passport you have. Obviously, in those situations, you want to ask what the deal is in that particular country. But generally speaking, if you come into a country on one passport, you want to leave the country on that passport. So I'm like, all right, you're doing a little bit of a shuffle here. And it's all legitimate. You're checking into the airline. Again, they want to know the airline's business, because if you get on a commercial flight and you get to your destination and they deport you, the airline is to pay a penalty. And so they want to make sure that you're not going to be sent back for not having the right form or the right pre-clearance or the right whatever. In a case like that, you may want to shift between two different passports. So how do you know which passport to use? Here's a few general rules. If you are a citizen of a country, you generally want to use that citizenship, that passport, that travel document, to enter and to leave the country. And so let's say you get a Caribbean citizenship by investment and you want to go visit your Caribbean country. Let's say I'm St. Lucia. I want to go to St. Lucia. Now, if I was also a U.S. citizen, I can go to St. Lucia as a U.S. citizen. And there are some countries where they don't really care. I've seen one country where when I crossed the land border and I used one passport to go into the first country and then I come back into my country of citizenship, they say, no, we don't even want to stamp our passport. We want to stamp the passport that you left the other country in, because this land border, that's how we do it. So there are some exceptions like that. And there are some countries where I've been told, yeah, we don't care if you use our passport or the other one. But generally speaking, and particularly in countries like a larger country like the US or many European countries, you're supposed to use that passport. Generally speaking, if I'm European and I'm traveling to another European country within the EEA, let's say I am Spanish and I'm coming back from a trip and I'm going to Latvia. I'm not going to use my St. Lucian passport in that case to get into Europe. I need to use my EU passport or my EEA passport, right? Because I could be Norwegian, I could be Swiss, what have you. So if you're entering a country or perhaps a block of countries, you want to use that. I'm not sure that necessarily applies to more informal blocks, like if you look at Mercosur in South America, but I would probably be inclined to use that. So whenever you're traveling to a country of your citizenship, for example, let's say my friend wanted to go through the Turkish citizenship by investment program. He wants to buy some property in Istanbul. He's going to get a passport in Turkey. Now he's US and now he's Turkish. He's going to leave the US on his US passport. He's going to go to Turkey and show the Turkish passport, and he's going to make sure the airline is satisfied that he's covered in each way. Now, Turkey may ask when he leaves, sometimes, CBI countries, or if you've been naturalized, they may say, do you still have the passport where you were born? He might show it. Okay, great, you're on your way. The other question is, how do I enter a third country? So let's say that I am a US and St. Lucian citizen and I'm going to Europe. And the answer, if I'm not a European citizen, is that it really doesn't matter. I mean, the Schengen area, for example, has what's called Annex 2, and the policy is the same for everyone. You get 90 days out of 180 days. There's not like, but we like Americans more. It's like, no, I mean, Americans, Canadians, St. Lucians, whomever has this Annex 2 privilege is on the same footing. Now, you may be asked some questions. I think that Europe plays it pretty much down the middle in most cases. There are maybe a few countries where they bother everybody, but they bother Americans too. What's your business here, right? And by the way, I mean, Americans are used to maybe not being asked questions places. If you use a different passport, they may ask you, hey, how long are you here? Don't freak out because they ask you how long you're here. That's not like they're ready to throw you in the hoosgow. It's just they're asking you how long you're here. That's part of the job, to make sure that you are going to leave. Especially, by the way, with the rise of digital nomads, where people just think they can go and live anywhere they want without having a work permit. There have been cases where Americans go and they go to the UK and they say, oh, I'm here for 3 months. How are you supporting yourself for 3 months? Oh, I've got an online job. I'm working while I'm here. Yeah, we don't want that. So when you go to third countries, if you have visa-free access to multiple passports, you can generally choose. Now, I don't want to necessarily confuse countries and be using every different passport I have. So I will say, okay, what's my passport that I'm going to use when I go to Europe, for example? And so therefore, I want to always be traveling with that passport. I want to always travel with any passports that I'm going to use at any point along my journey. And if I'm going on an extended journey, I want to make sure I think, where am I going? Including, am I going to go through any of my countries of citizenship? If I am a Turkish citizen and I fly Turkish Airlines and have a layover and my flight gets canceled and I want to go in, I want to have that Turkish passport with me. I would say, what's the best presentation, right? So if I'm American and if I'm St. Lucian, there may be countries where Americans are more welcome. Again, I don't think in a place like Europe it really matters that much. I don't think in most countries it matters that much. But if I think that that's a stronger identity, I will use that. Let's say you get a passport somewhere through your ancestry in Eastern Europe. Like if I'm Serbian or something, maybe I would use my Serbian passport if I'm going to Montenegro. On the other hand, you can also say, well, they're going to expect you to speak Serbian. And like, why don't you speak Serbian? And, I think you'll tell them why you don't, and you'll be on your way. So, in a third country, part of the benefit of having two passports is there may be times when you can't get in you can only get in with one passport. So one example is 4 of the Caribbean citizenship countries have visa-free access to Russia. 2 have access to China. Fewer Westerners going to those countries now than they were a couple years ago. But if you're an American, you need to get a visa to go to Russia or China. And so those are probably some of the only countries you need a visa to go to. Some Caribbean passports, you can go to Venezuela, while Americans have a harder time getting in there. And so, if that's your situation, you probably want to go with the easier passport. But you want to understand, okay, how am I presenting myself with this? Overall, I think a lot of people put too much emphasis on it. A passport's a passport. You may be asked how you got the passport. I got it by making an investment, or I got it because I lived there, or I got it, because my ancestors are from there. So being asked questions is not necessarily the end of the world. What you wanted to basically do is just understand where you can get in without a visa. And if you start to want to create an identity for yourself somewhere else, like let's say, hey, I don't want to use my U.S. passport because I'm now St. Lucian and I want to see what it's like to be St. Lucian. Maybe I don't want to be American in the future if it all goes well. That's something that I might suggest doing, right? There are people who are considering giving up their current citizenship. Well, then you should see what it's like living as a citizen of the other country. I have traveled to places as a U.S. citizen, no longer have a U.S. passport, and so now when I go, I obviously don't enter as a U.S. citizen. And only one country has ever said, but you have a U.S. passport. Maybe 2, but only one did they really push me on it. And I'm like, guys, I actually ended up getting a lawyer to write me a letter and being like, here's the status, here's the certificate of loss of nationality translated. I mean, that's an extreme step, giving up your current citizenship, and one that people in certain parts of the world don't understand why you do it, because they wouldn't do it. But other than that, you really don't get bothered. And so I think that, if you were to shift from using, let's say, a U.S. passport to using a citizenship by investment passport, you will see what it's like, and you're really not going to encounter much more difficulty. Now, let's say you want to visit a country like Malaysia for Nomad Capitalist Live. An American, a Canadian, a European is going to get 90 days in Malaysia. So is a Turk, by the way. Whereas, other countries like a Caribbean CBI is only going to get 30 days. And so if 30 days is acceptable for you, well, then that's cool. You could try out using the other one, because I don't think that a country like Malaysia or Singapore or the UAE, they don't care. If your passport is visa-free, it's visa-free. They're going to take that at face value. So understand where you can get in, understand how long you can get in. And in some cases, again, the second passport gets you in or gets you to stay in longer. So a Turkish citizen might be able to spend more time in certain places than even some European citizens. All right, so there's benefits to all of them, but generally speaking, those are the rules. Third countries are where you kind of have to make a judgment call. Otherwise, you're entering each country with its own passport, and that is the deal. If you have further questions, leave them in the comments below. We'd love to help you out.